Gennady Golovkin rematch looming in just a week or two. It's time to discuss what are the after effects of that fight. What happens to the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list if Canelo proves me wrong? If he proves all of us wrong, who believe that he is going to lose the fight.
What happens?
Rest assured, I believe that Gennady Golovkin is going to win that fight. I believe he's going to win that fight by knockout or technical knockout. But in the event that I'm wrong, the effects of that fight, and there will be effects, they have to reverberate. In fact, they will. They will reverberate and they will be reflected on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Currently, Gennady Golovkin sits at number 5 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. He is very much a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. On my list, I don't know about yours, but you know Gennady Golovkin is widely regarded at minimum, as being a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter on most pound-for-pound lists. So what happens if Canelo beats him? Many of you are already aware of how my list works and the rules that govern my list. That no fighter absent of a world title and no fighter coming off a loss
makes the list,
can maintain a spot on the list. If Canelo were to beat Gennady Golovkin, he would effectively bump him off. But there is a little bit more to it than just that. You see, Canelo Alvarez's track record, it's not limited to the middleweight division. He has an entire body of work in the junior middleweight division. And say what you will. Have your opinions. Speak your mind. You know, I'm not telling you guys to like Canelo Alvarez.
I don't.
I'm saying that this list is structured a certain way. This list is structured to filter out the opinions, yours and mine. You guys know I'm no fan of Canelo Alvarez. You guys know I think he's a cheater. I think he's a cheater, among other things. But at the end of the day, those are my personal opinions about this kid based on the facts. That I don't believe his tainted meat story. I can't prove it, but I don't believe it. But those opinions aside, those feelings aside, the list and all of these particulars, they revolve around the contest, around the rematch between Gennady Golovkin and Canelo Alvarez. So if Canelo Alvarez wins, it's got to be reflected. Because if it weren't, then this wouldn't be very objective at all. This wouldn't be an objective list at all. It would be just as hypocritical as the morons we criticize here on a daily basis. And we're not going to stoop to that. If Canelo wins the rematch, he will be reintegrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. And depending on the fashion of the victory, if he is to be victorious, which I don't think he will, but we'll see. But if he is to be victorious, he will emerge somewhere in the top 5. And depending on how spectacular a fashion he wins, like I reiterate, I don't think he's going to win, but whatever. But if he does win in spectacular fashion, he may just emerge ahead of Alexander Usyk, bumping Usyk down to 5 and seating Canelo at number 4. Now you guys might be listening to this and you might not like it.
Fuck off.
But along with not liking it, I bet you're asking what's the rhyme and the reason. What's the rhyme and the reason for Canelo to be reintegrated into the list, and why would he emerge ahead of Usyk if he beats Gennady? Why would that happen? Well, here's the thing. Canelo Alvarez has a more extensive track record than Usyk over more weight classes. He's been a champion in more weight classes more times than Usyk. Thus, his body of work being more extensive lends credence
to the rank
and meets the requisite criteria. The criteria that governs this list.
Okay.
It meets more of that criteria, thus justifying Canelo emerging ahead of Usyk. I know that a lot of you guys don't like the sound of that, but the logic itself has to be sound, because the list itself revolves around facts, stats, outcomes, and most of all, objectivity. Putting feelings aside so that the list itself accurately reflects the best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport today, and that all fighters, even the ones you don't like, are being rated evenly and measured evenly against everyone else on the list. The logic has to stick. The logic doesn't change because you wanted Gennady Golovkin to win. It doesn't change, okay? The logic has to stick. So when you look at the criteria that governs the list, you'll see that in defeating Gennady Golovkin, Canelo would meet several of the requisites. He will have beaten a pound-for-pound fighter, thus earning a spot. He will then not only be the lineal middleweight champion, but a unified middleweight champion. He will be a unified champion in yet another weight class. And this will be yet another champion's scalp that he will have collected. If he does win the fight, you can say that he beat a champion in Golovkin, a champion in Liam Smith, a champion in Miguel Cotto, a champion in Austin Trout. You see what I'm getting at? Okay, so if that's the way it happens, we got to put our feelings aside and stick to the rules that govern the list. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Now, I'll tell you this much. It doesn't change my pick at all. I'm just explaining it to you guys because a lot of people struggle understanding how this list works. That doesn't mean that I think Canelo's gonna win when these guys fight. I don't think he's gonna win. I think he's gonna get stopped. And we'll discuss more of that as the fight date approaches, but I'm just letting you guys know that if the kid does pull it off, and he does prove all of us wrong, all of us who think he's gonna lose, yeah, he's gonna emerge on the list. That's the way it works, whether you guys like it or not, because that's why the list is made this way. So that regardless of whether you like it or not, it accurately reflects the outcomes. Now, on the other side of that coin, and I know, I can tell already that some of you aren't going to like the next thing I'm going to say. But if Gennady Golovkin proves me right, and he beats Canelo Alvarez, will that be enough to propel him ahead of Alexander Usyk? And I'm afraid to say, based on the rules that govern this list, no, it won't be enough. Gennady Golovkin beating Canelo Alvarez, you know, look at it this way. Usyk and Golovkin have both only fought in one weight class, but Usyk has already defeated more champions in far less time than Gennady Golovkin. If Golovkin beats Canelo, you know, Canelo's not holding any alphabet titles. He's not even holding the ring belt anymore. The only championship that Canelo has is the lineal championship, and we know that's not even like a physical belt that you take home. That has more to do with lineage. It means something, of course. It does mean something to defeat a lineal champion. But even with that still doesn't mean Golovkin beat more champions than Usyk. That just means Golovkin beat two champions. In defeating Canelo, you know, he's not unifying a title, whereas Usyk is the undisputed champion. There are no more champions left for him to fight. Whereas Golovkin, he'd still have some catching up to do. Especially now that he's not the IBF champion anymore. He's only holding 2 of the 4, where he used to hold 3 of the 4. While Usyk holds them all. He's got all the fucking Pokeballs. You know? So in defeating Canelo, that really won't strengthen his argument enough to move him past Alexander Usyk. That's the way the cookie crumbles because it's all based on the criteria. You know, had Golovkin been a champion at 154 and then he moved up to middleweight or whatever, then that would be enough to move him past Usyk, because then we could say, well, both of these guys, you know, they're good fighters, but Golovkin's been a champion in more weight classes than Usyk. So there's an argument there for you to move him past him. But as it stands, Golovkin's got catching up to do with Usyk. So it wouldn't make sense to rank him ahead of Usyk for beating Canelo. It wouldn't. I'm sorry, I know that a lot of you guys, you're not liking the sound of this, but the rules are the rules. It's important to maintain objectivity in these kinds of situations because that shows character, and more importantly, it facilitates that this list and its logic is sound. Now, what I will say is, you know, the guys that are behind Golovkin, Saw Rungvisai, Jarrett Hurd, Adonis Stevenson.
Adonis Stevenson?
Yeah, he's there next to Eleider Alvarez, Leo Santa Cruz. Those guys that are ranked behind Golovkin. The good news is that those guys would stand very little chance of moving past Golovkin if he does beat Canelo. They'd have to collect one hell of a fucking scalp, or get a lot of business done in their respective divisions to move past Golovkin if he does beat Canelo. So he is cementing his spot, and he can only move up thereafter. You know, if he gets back his IBF title, if he goes on to fight for the WBO, or he decides to challenge a champion in the super middleweight division, then he can only move on thereafter. And these guys, they really, you know, like I said, it'd be very hard for these guys to move past Golovkin if he does beat Canelo. Now, I know, I can tell that a lot of you guys aren't liking this news, but I'll remind you that that's the way that this list works. That's the way that this list works based on its rules and the criteria that governs it. You guys have your own list, I imagine, with its own criteria, and you can structure it however you want. Whether it's you know, you don't like a particular element of this criteria, or maybe you just want to cater to your favorite fighters. A lot of people do. A lot of people do. But in any event, this is how this list works, okay? The logic has to be sound. It can't change to accommodate anybody. And Golovkin beating Canelo does not allow him to meet more of the merits that govern this list than Usyk has. It doesn't. Sorry. And now, in regards to another fight that's right around the corner, not that far away, the upcoming fight between Danny Garcia and Sean Porter. Will that fight have an effect on this list? And I dare say yes, it would. It would because of one of the fighters participating. Not so much the other, but one. And the one that I'm talking about is Danny Garcia. You see, Danny Garcia isn't a guy that you see gracing a lot of pound-for-pound lists. Even in his heyday, this wasn't a guy whose accomplishments were getting the proper recognition. You know, Danny Garcia's got arguably one of the best resumes in the welterweight division, if not the best resume, and one of the best resumes in professional boxing.
He does.
Yet this isn't reflected on most pound-for-pound lists that are out there, whether you're talking about CBS or Ring Magazine or you know, just all the boxing media outlets pound-for-pound lists. Yet this is a guy who's faced his share of seasoned veterans. Seasoned veterans like Robert Guerrero, Eric Morales, not once but twice, Paulie Malignaggi, Zab Judah, Brandon Rios, Kendall Holt, Ashley Theophane. He's faced his share of seasoned vets, and he's faced his share of prime fighters. Amir Khan, in a fight he was favored to lose. Lucas Mathise, in a fight he was favored to lose. Lamont Peterson, in a controversial fight. But, you know, we can sit here splitting hairs all day if we're going to go off of opinions. Danny Garcia came out on top in that fight. He was the unified WBC, WBA, and Ring Magazine champion at 140 pounds. Moved up and became the WBC champion at 147 pounds. So just imagine if he does it again. If he becomes the WBC champion and he adds the name of Sean Porter to what is already a damn good resume. Danny Garcia's argument to grace this list, it'll be a strong argument. It'll be a strong enough argument for him to emerge at number 8, moving Eleider Alvarez to number 9 and Adonis Stevenson to number 10, effectively putting him in the most danger of being bumped off the list altogether. And that'd pretty much bump off Leo Santa Cruz, because, you know, Leo's an accomplished guy. He has his share of merits. It's not that he doesn't. But he made it onto this list by way of someone else's elimination. Not so much the merits of his own, you know, track record, even though he does have merits. He does have merits that meet the criteria. But it was really because someone else got bumped off and there was a vacant slot, thus he was more of a placeholder. Danny Garcia's argument is much stronger than either Eleider Alvarez or Adonis Stevenson or Leo Santa Cruz. So, I'll put it to you this way. If Danny Garcia collects the scalp of Sean Porter and becomes a 2-time WBC champion at 147, he's gonna emerge on this list. And he's going to emerge at number 8. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what about Sean Porter? If he wins this fight, if he beats Danny Garcia, and he becomes the WBC champion, does he emerge on this list? And I hate to say it, but no. His argument won't be strong enough off of that alone. That alone, it won't do it. You gotta understand that Danny already has the argument. He's already been a unified champion and a lineal champion in a previous weight class. And he's already been a champion in this weight class. So becoming a champion again, it only strengthens what's already there, and it allows him to meet the minimum requisites. Whereas Sean has a solid track record, and he is a great fighter. But, you know, those eggs need more bacon. This in and of itself won't be enough because he doesn't quite have the track record that Danny does. I know that may seem a bit unfair to you, but when you break it down, stat by stat, fight by fight, division by division, title by title, you will see that Danny, right now, is a more accomplished fighter than Sean Porter, who's only suffered one setback, okay? For Sean to emerge on this list, he might need to do something. He might need to unify. Unify with a guy like Errol Spence.
Learn to punch, learn to knee, learn to block. I ain't CANELO.
That was nice.
With Johnny fucking Cage, bitch!
I'm doing a promo.
Subscribe to Johnny Cage YouTube channel.